But sometimes this scheduling of African Cup of Nations will hinder their progress in their careers, because one of the reason why these leagues should be, why this tournament should be scheduled when these top 5 leagues are not playing is about the value of an African player. And some teams will opt not completely not buying African players, because that is the end market. That is our product going to represent us. That is an African who is going to represent the continent. There is always conflict between these two, between the country and the club, releasing these players to come back and represent their native countries. Thomas Partey to come and represent his native country, Ghana. Liverpool had to release Sadio Mane and Salah to come back and represent their countries.
Arsenal have their breakup. It's another error to Rob Martinelli. Fighting again.
Hello guys, welcome to the FOOTBALL-MACE. Chef Bim Gono. It's gonna be slippery just as usual. I'm back, and today I'd like to talk about African Cup of Nations and the scheduling of African Cup of Nations, because I usually fail to understand why is it that so many things related to Africa, they must have so many complications, regulations, and timing. Oh, people are this, people that, weather, conditions. I usually fail to understand the logic behind the scheduling of African Cup of Nations in January and in February, which is held after every 2 years. Who came up with these conditions and scheduling of considering weather? Oh, we have some parts of Africa that they are wet, that they are rainy season, they are dry season, hot season. All these conditions. Whoever is watching this video, why is it that when it comes to Euros, World Cup, all these other major tournaments, I usually don't hear so many conditions and the scheduling of these tournaments? Because what is mandatory in about those other international competitions like Euros, it must be played when the top 5 leagues are done. But in Africa, the leagues are stopped for players to go to play in African Cup of Nations. This one of the major conditions that I think African Cup of Nations should stand firm on is the scheduling of African Cup of Nations is about the value of an African player. Yes, each and every player who plays in big clubs in Europe will always come back and play and represent his native country. That is commendable. That is kudos to them. I'm very happy and humbled and respect them for that. But keep in mind, these players, they are employed full time with these European clubs. There is always conflict between these two, between the country and the club, releasing these players to come back and represent their native countries. And some teams will opt not completely not buying African players, because that is the end market. That is an African who is going to represent the continent. Be it a Nigerian, be it a Kenyan, be it a Sudanese, be it an Eritrean, a Libyan, Algerian, Moroccan, all those Egyptian, all those players, they represent Africa. And they will always be very patriotic to represent their native countries. But sometimes this scheduling of African Cup of Nations will hinder their progress in their careers. Because I can remember when Arsenal was fighting for the English Premier League, they had to release Thomas Partey to come and represent his native country, Ghana. Liverpool had to release Sadio Mane and Salah to come back and represent their countries. January is when the race to win the title hot's up in the English Premier League, in Serie A, in La Liga, in League One. You can imagine, maybe he's playing in a championship somewhere in England. They are fighting to get promotion to the English Premier League. And they have to release one of their marquee players, one of their most important players. They have to release them to come back and represent their countries when they require their services. during these huge matches when they're competing for titles and promotions and whatever competition they are competing for. Because I usually fail to understand there is this logic reason, like for example in some attempts in 2019 Afcon was held in June and July in Egypt to align with the off season in Europe, but concerns over heat in many host countries made this less viable a long term. You want to tell me in Europe there is no heat concern? In these other continents there are no concerns of heat. These other European countries, Asian countries, Western countries, they have snow during winter. Snow until majority of games they are postponed. But the league continues. The league continues. When there is the temperature is so high, there is always a cooling break. We Africans, we are used to heat because 90, 40, 50, 70, 80% of Africans, majority of them, they have never left African countries to go anywhere, to go abroad, in short. So we are used to heat. These players, they are used to heat because they were raised in Africa. These players are used to winter. They adjust and adapt to playing in England, in Norway, in Russia, in Asian countries, in Dubai, in Qatar, in Australia. You want to tell me these players cannot adjust to the heat in Africa when they come back to their native countries? But they can adjust and adapt to winter days, to summer, to autumn. But in Africa, they give us these reasons so that African Cup of Nations should be held or should be scheduled during January and February only because those are the dry seasons. Who came up with these weather concerns in Africa? African Cup of Nations should be scheduled when it is off season. These players were raised, majority of them, they were raised in Africa. They can adapt to the heat in Africa. We Africans ourselves are used to this heat because we were born and raised and live in this country, in this continent. African leagues, I usually fail to understand their calendars, the way they scheduled their matches. But today my major concern is in African Cup of Nations because it is traditionally held after every 2 years during January and February. Yeah, which aligns with the dry season in many African countries. Who said that African Cup of Nations should only be played during dry season? Who said that? Who said that these players play during winter, during summer, during autumn, whenever they are playing in these Western countries? But in Africa, they tell us it is scheduled after every 2 years during January and February, which aligns with the dry season. You can imagine. At which underline the word dry season in many African countries. Who told these people that we fear rain or we cannot watch matches during rainy season? Dry season in many African countries, and avoid the rainy seasons in Central and West Africa. You can see the reasons. That is the major reason why it is scheduled in January and February. Majority of these countries can accommodate African Cup of Nations. But the problem is the leadership. We have so many presidents in Africa who are not sportsmen or women. They do not see any importance with football. They don't see any importance with any sports activity. And that's why majority of countries in Africa don't invest in infrastructure that can accommodate such kind of matches. A country like Kenya, where that is my country, we can accommodate, we can host African Cup of Nations. By ourselves, individually, we can host African Cup of Nations. But we have leadership that doesn't support and believe in sports, in any kind of sports. They do not invest in infrastructure that can support these kind of tournaments. And this is my plea to CAF, the president of CAF, the Mamelodi Sundowns owner, Peter Motsepe. They should relook into the scheduling of Afcon. It should be scheduled during off-season. We Africans are tough people. We Africans are people who can adapt to each and every circumstances that is thrown on our way. What is so difficult that we cannot adjust to rescheduling of this African Cup of Nations? This is my plea. And for example, next edition, that is 2015 edition, 2025 edition, scheduled for December 2025 to January in Morocco. That is a rare winter summer straddle due to scheduling and weather concerns. These players play in Europe where there is winter and there is summer. But in Africa, we have concerns over there. Who bewitched us as a continent? Who comes up with these concerns? And there is always weather concerns when it comes to African tournaments. But when it is Europe, when it is Premier League, Bundesliga, these other leagues like Norway, it is snow almost every time. It's very cold in London, Manchester. But the league goes on. When there is high temperature, there is a cooling break in between first half and second half. I don't get the logic behind this. This is my thinking. This is my opinion. Let me know what is your opinion down in the comment section, and let me know what you think I should talk about in my next episode. Thanks so much for watching the Football Mess. Chef Bill Mkono. It's gonna be slippery just as usual. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Merci. Asanteni sana. It's gonna be slippery just as usual. I'm out.